Anyway, so now we have folks from Bela, and so we have Aiden here, and Clemens is here in the room, and yes. Did you lose your? It's loading.
Yeah, it's loading. Wow. Okay. There you go.
There we go.
Hi everyone. I'm Adan. I'm a PhD student at the Center for Digital Music at Queen Mary University of London, but I'm also one of the developers, maintainers of Bela, and I'm here together with Clemens. Oh, is it? Oh, shoot. Oh, okay. I thought it was too loud, but maybe not that much. So, yeah, is that better? Okay. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about low latency interaction with Bela, the what, the why, and the how. If you've been to SMC, which happened here earlier this year, you recognize a few of the things that I'm going to show on screen. Hopefully there will be a few that are new. And many of them, I'm sure most of you guys working with FPGAs will be really aware of. This is our particular approach. So who is Bela? Bela is now a spin-off company that was founded at the Augmented Instruments Lab, Queen Mary University of London, and is now affiliated to Imperial College as well. There's 5 maintainers, but since earlier this year, we joined forces for Bela 2.0 with the guys from CHAIR, from the Center of Haptic Audio. So Max, Clemens, and Sebastian. Clemens is here today, and he will be with us on the workshop. What do? We have this platform that I hope many of you are familiar with, which is an open source platform for creating interactive audio or interactive objects. We have several flavors and versions of the platform, but we have also worked on capacitive sensing just to try to make it more approachable for makers. And we are nerds, and so we like to put our things in Eurorack format. So we also have a few Eurorack things going on, a few of them at the moment. But yeah, what is Bela? Bela is an embedded computer designed for interactive audio, which is based on the now a little bit dated Beaglebone Black platform that has the power of a Linux single-board computer, the connectivity of a microcontroller, and is optimized for real time. When we designed this, we took a specific approach to high bandwidth sensor processing so that the analog digital inputs and outputs are sampled at audio rate, which allows us to achieve really low latency, like below 1 millisecond. I mean, for FPGA guys, 1 millisecond is like, oh, that's too much. But you can do interesting things. You can get to microsecond latency on Bela. And maybe perhaps as important, jitter-free alignment. So you can have the audio stream, the digital stream, and the sample stream sample line with almost zero jitter in most situations. And our platform is open source, and we are proud to develop a community around it, and we support it, and we use it in education. So that's part of what we do. Okay, interactive systems. Is this an interactive systems? Like there's some, I mean, this is a diagram of an audio process. You have an audio input, you get an audio output, you have your codecs, and the audio process can run on Bela. Where this is interactive or not, it's up to you. If you are controlling parameters, then perhaps it's interactive. If you are doing something based on whatever you're performing, then perhaps it's interactive. So it's something to take into account, and we'll see later why. But in many approaches, something that, like what we define in literature and across other people's works as an interactive system is something that has an action that is sensed, then is processed, and then it controls the process that generates audio or manipulates audio, right? This, like, we try to make it really easy. This is our focus. Our focus is on making these things jitter-free, low latency, and actually approachable, which has not always been the case. Okay, so what is a real-time interactive system? Many people here know, but like there's this misconception. It's not a system that it runs really fast, but a system that does things without missing a deadline. There's a bounded time in which you need to do things, and a real-time system does things in that bounded time. It needs to be consistent, and it needs to be guaranteed. As a general rule, in order to achieve this, the processing of each sample that you have in your input-output needs to take less or equal than the sample period average. If not, you will not be in bounded time anymore. And there's a differentiation between hard and soft real-time systems. We are talking about hard real-time systems here, the ones that never miss the deadline, no matter what happens. What is latency? There's been talks about latency today before. There's several definitions depending on how you're approaching it, but for an interactive system is the delay between an action and a reaction. The action being perhaps the input that you're gathering with your sensor, the reaction being the audio that you're generating. This latency is related to this upper bound that we defined for the real-time system. So the latency the latency of your system is going to determine what the upper bound is going to be, and the other way around. It's a mathematical property, so it doesn't matter how fast your system is, how parallelizable it is. This is something that you're going to have to deal with at some point, and it adds up. So you need to consider the worst case scenario. Like every bit of your system that has latency on it is going to add up to a greater latency. What are the latency deadlines that we find in interactive systems and in audio in general? This is a log scale for time, which is perhaps not the best way to represent time, but I thought it would be fitting for this presentation. About 100 milliseconds, you can actually differentiate different events as a delay, right? You can tell if your latency is greater than 100 milliseconds, then you can actually listen to events happening. In between 25 milliseconds and 100 milliseconds, you get this flanging effect, as some people miscalled back in the 70s, that is also perceptible as an audible effect. And then when you get below that, you perhaps don't notice it as something audible, but you start noticing it as part of your interaction. There was a study performed by one of my colleagues, by Robbie, he's also one of the developers at Bela, a while ago on setting different latencies for percussive instruments. And for example, like with 20 milliseconds, professional percussionists could already tell the difference in perceived instrument quality. This brings us to the 10 milliseconds upper bound, which David Wessel said in 2002, and is cited all along NIME, and is used as a measure of how reactive your system is. But even below that, latency can be important, right? So this tells you that 10 milliseconds should be the ideal aim for an audible reaction to gesture. But below that, you have other things. You have USB MIDI, for example, can take 5 to 6 seconds. So whatever you do needs to be done between those 5 to 6 milliseconds, sorry. If you're doing active feedback control, you probably want sub-millisecond latency. Even more if you're doing traveling wave estimation, that's active feedback control in which you're actually trying to predict where the wave is, you want that latency. But moreover, what I would like people to take away from this, and many of you might know already, you always need to consider the worst case performance. So wherever you can reduce latency, do it, because then you might have to increase it for a later process somewhere else. And as I said, like performers don't want their instruments failing. When you're creating music, you want to be engaged. Anything that is disruptive is going to mess with that performance. So you want to create systems that are hard real time, that meet the deadlines every time. Okay? Okay. What happens when latency changes over time? There's this when you're on a round trip audio latency, or kind of like a processing latency situation, latency tends to be constant. You tend to have the same consistent audio latency, right? But whenever you're trying to interact with that audio stream and you have things that happen in a different thread, in a different process, then you can introduce this effect that is the random variation of latency called jitter. That happens a lot when you treat sensors as a different thread. So let's say you have different blocks that you're reading from audio, and then at some point you receive a trigger from sensor data. If this is in a different thread, the sooner that you can react for this is going to be the next lock. And same. So you're going to have this perceived misalignment of your action and the sound that you're generating, which is what jitter means. And this increases with block size. If your block size is bigger because you're trying to do some bigger processing, jitter is going to increase with it. This has proven to be if not as disruptive as latency, more disruptive. So again, David Wessel's wisdom, try to achieve 1 millisecond jitter as the maximum of your system. But if you have 0 jitter, that's even better. 3 milliseconds jitter for professional percussionists has proven to be even worse than like a double increase in latency from 10 milliseconds to 20 milliseconds. So something to take into account. Okay. What are the sources of latency in the system, right? You have, this is an audio system, you're reading some inputs, then you have your analog realm where the audio exists, then that's converted to digital bitstream, sorry, that's processed by some drivers, and then you have some processing code, which is usually the part where you write and do interesting stuff with it. You have the conversion latency from analog to digital and digital to analog, which is, as it has been mentioned before, is inherent to the code, to the codecs that you use for that. So you can get up to 500 microseconds. As I said, it doesn't sound too much, but everything adds up. And maybe extra if you're using other kind of converters. You have the buffering latency. This is a function of your architecture. It depends on how your block size is handled and the size of your block size. This tends to be quite substantial, especially if you want to do things that take more than just a few samples. And then you have the group delay or the latency that your audio code takes, right? Where that's filters, where that's block-based processing like FFTs. Everything has this code that you're going to write is going to have an inherent mathematical latency, as it was shown before with the filters. What can you do to solve these bits? For the conversion latency, you can try to use a higher quality ADC or a codec, or one that doesn't use filtering, as we do on the analog inputs on Bela. For the buffering latency, it's up to how you really structure those buffers. It's up to the OS and the buffer size that you use. And for the group delay, it depends on your code. It really depends on what you're writing, what you're trying to achieve there. The problem gets even worse when we are trying about interaction and trying to use data from sensors to manipulate audio. This is what many people do and how many interactive system design classes are taught. You have a microcontroller that gathers some sensor data, transfers it over serial to a computer, and you react to that sensor data. There's a few problems with latency with that. You have the sampling latency of the sensors, which can be something between 1 to 100 milliseconds, depending on which sensors you're using, and the protocols that those sensors communicate with the microcontroller with. You have the communication latency. This is, these numbers are a little bit dated, but you'll be surprised that many people still use 9,600 bits per second in their code, but it adds up. If you're communicating over a wireless protocol, this is going to increase. If you have a better protocol, this might decrease. Is there a better protocol than USB? USB has improved a little bit, but still. Then you're going to have the OS driver latency. Most drivers in a normal OS are not tailored for speed. You need a specific OS that does that, and it's unpredictable. It can be really good until once it's really bad, and then it screws everything up. It depends on what processes are running on your operating system. And of course, you have your audio latency. What can you do to solve them? You can use different sensors, you can use different standards for communication, or you can have custom drivers. Or you can just not have any communication, or you can just figure a different protocol. What do we do with Bela? I'll get into that a little later. Okay, I'm not going to get, since we are constrained time, I'm not going to get into this because I assume that many people here know how buffering and latency works. But when we gather samples from a buffer, we cannot immediately use them. We need to be able to process them and then feed them back to the output. So you usually end up with a couple of blocks at least of processing latency. So that's something to take into account. If you have a block size of 16 samples, then your latency is going to be 2 by 16 divided by your sample rate, obviously. And at a given time, your system is going to have to be gathering data, processing data, and writing data to the output. But what happens when you want to run processes that take longer than 16 samples, 256 samples? That could be an FFT, that could be some machine learning prediction, that can be granular synthesis. How do you deal with that? We usually use like overlap and add is one of the methods that is used, on which you gather windows, you overlap these windows, you add them, you do whatever processing needs to be done, and then you add them together at the output. In the FFT is one of those cases. And the important thing about this is that it's non-causal. Any block in your output is going to depend on future blocks in your input. So that's going to add latency. Even if you had an ideal system with no conversion latency, not buffering latency, no communications latency, if you want to do block-based processing, that's going to have inherent latency. So yeah, in the case of EFFT, you get a block size a block of size m. By window, you perform the FFT of it. You do something interesting with it. You perform the FFT, add a segment to output buffer so that you can write it back. And then when you write it back, you advance by the hop size. As I said, ideally, you would want to have a block at your input and immediately write the block at your output. But in reality, that doesn't happen, right? It's non-causal. You need information from the future, so you need to wait until that information is filled. It's a non-causal system. So what's the best that you can do? The best that you can do is wait by the size of the window of the process that you're trying to run, right? What happens then? You solve the problem, you have the data that you needed, but then you only have one sample to process it. How much can you do in one sample? That really depends on how your architecture is scheduled, but is organized, but usually not much. So at least you need to wait for the next hop size to be able to do the computations for the next window. So even if you had that ideal system with no latency at the input, no latency at the output, no buffering latency, and you're doing some block processing, you're going to have an n plus h latency, inherent latency in your code. This is important for the kind of stuff that the people, for the trends and the kind of like the more computationally expensive trends that are taking these days. You usually need more time than what your processor is capable of doing unless you have a massively parallel processor to do the things that you want to do at the output. It also has an effect on jitter. If you, let's say you're reacting to events that come at a specific point, that could be percussive events, or that could be data from your sensor, you're quantized by the hop size. And this can have several issues. How do we do this in Bela? Bela has an audio codec and a DAC and an ADC that use communication interfaces that could be implemented in Linux. But why don't we use Linux? Linux and ALSA can handle multimodal stream and also don't offer strict timing guarantees. The way we solve this is by using a responsive operating system based on Xenomai, on which the threads run when we want them to run as often as possible, and a sophisticated DMA memory access controller based on the PRU, on which the audio analog and GPIO are aligned at audio rate. The Xenomai system, I can get a little bit into detail. I'm running out of time, so I can get into detail later. But it makes the audio thread run at higher priority. Nothing messes with the audio thread. You can run other Linux processes if you want, but the audio thread takes priority over anything else. I'm not going to explain this. But I'm going to get a little bit into why don't we just use Xenomai. If you wanted, you could write a hardware peripheral a driver for the hardware peripheral for Xenomai that does it. But Xenomai doesn't really work at sample level, so you will miss that alignment of audio, digital, and analog. And also, you will need a dedicated core. When we implemented this, we only had this single core device, so it was not really an option for us. What did we use instead? The nice thing about the Citara SOCs that we are using is that it comes with a programmable real-time unit that is optimized for time-sensitive tasks and runs really fast instructions and shares memory, has its own memory and shares the memory also with the CPU and can generate and receive interrupts. So what the DMA does, the DMA controller does that we wrote on the PRU, it basically takes your audio input, takes your audio output, takes the analog ADCs, takes the digital I/O, and in as fast as possible, if possible in half a block size, mashes all them together in a sample aligned buffer that then you can use. So whenever you're starting to write your code, you have a buffer A sample line for audio, digital, and analog. That allows us to use sensors as audio, so that you get rid of that jitter. It's almost a zero jitter system. There's sort of figures of the kind of latency that you can achieve with Bela. You can achieve under millisecond latency, and some people have done it. You basically need to use need to get rid of the codec and use the analog inputs and outputs. That's where you see that everything really adds up on the system. If you use a sigma delta codec that has some filtering on it, that's gonna add up to the latency of your system. Okay. Apart from that, why do we use a Linux computer instead of a microcontroller? It allows us to do these kind of things. It allows us to really easily have different kind of languages running on it. We don't need to write compilers. We don't need to mess up with it so much, because we have already a Linux machine that is able to compile code for us. And moreover, it allows us to have a pipeline that is integrated in our system. In our case, and if you come to the workshop later, you'll see it, you don't need to install any drivers usually. You don't need to install any pipeline. You can just hook up the board to your computer and compile it and run it. Yeah, if you want to learn more about Bela, it's open source. It's a project that's always open to contributions. We have a knowledge base with lots of information, a forum where Julio is usually giving answers to people when they want them. We have a blog where we showcase the things that we do. And there's a YouTube course on real-time processing with Bela, which is freely available. And since you had to listen to me for 20 minutes, I'm giving you a 10% discount on kits through the end of the month, in case you thought that Bela is an option for you. Thank you very much. And yeah, any questions?
Do you have the name of the audio codec that I suppose you use an audio codec to do the conversion? Yeah.
It's a TI-TLV. I don't remember, but I don't
just the brand. Do you know the?
It's TI, Texas Instruments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
That's for the audio codec for the ADCs and the DACs. We actually, like the ones that are there, we actually are changing them for a new revision because of the semiconductor crisis. Yay! So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, because you know the latency that just the audio codec add to your system, or?
I don't remember how much is the group delay. How much is the filtering delay of the sigma delta converter? But I think it's about I think it's around the 500 microseconds.
Okay.
Deadline that I put in there. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
But yeah, I can check it on the data sheet later. Yeah.
Other questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I would like to also ask, you said also we could bypass the codec somehow. I didn't really understand how.
I mean, it's not that you can bypass the codec. You can just use the analog converters instead of the audio codec. That means that you're gonna have DC couple audio, so you're gonna have to decouple it. And of course, it's not a sigma delta converter, so the quality might drop a little bit. So they are the converters that we use for the analog. They are successive approximation register converters. That means that they don't have the filtering that you will have on a sigma converter, so they are faster. Actually, I need to check how much it is, but they are faster. But the problem is that they are a little bit noisier. I mean, sigma delta converters were designed to deal with that noise that the successive approximation register converters don't have. But people have used them successfully, for example, like for feedback control.
Great.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think we have any questions online, right? Okay. Well, thank you.